With the release of Microsoft's 365, customers have access to an incredible array of security tools. How they can deploy these security tools and still allow their end users to reach maximum productivity is the challenge. In today's session, Advanced Security Options with Microsoft 365, Planet's Senior Cloud Strategist, Jeff Fowler's going to take you through and make sure you understand what's included in Microsoft M365, and then we're going to have an exciting panel conversation about how we can get it deployed and make it useful. Jeff?
Thank you, Steve. So when we look at Microsoft 365 and the security options and capabilities, it's really a wealth of things that we can do these days that never really had before. When you look at on-prem versus in the cloud, the agility of the cloud, the ability to innovate, have new services, do much faster, it's really created a great environment where organizations can truly up their security posture across the board while still becoming agile and being productive at the same time. So when you look at Microsoft 365 security, there's four primary pillars when it comes to the security arena. The first one's identity and access management, where you're focusing on the identities of your users themselves, how you access systems, how you prevent people from accessing your systems. Also, you have information protection in terms of protecting your information, your data across your tenant, across your devices, and making sure that the bad guys don't get access to it. The next part is threat management, understanding what the threats are, managing those threats, and protecting your information, your systems from an awareness perspective. And the final pillar is security management. Security management is all about what tools you have available to you, how do you manage and have the visibility into your services and your systems and your users and everything else in between. So the first one we're looking at is really securing the front door. This is identity and access management. So this is really the part one of two parts in terms of security and services, where the first part is all about securing your stuff and the second part is all about visibility. So when we look at identity and access management, we've really moved beyond the traditional castle walls model of traditional security. In the old data centers, you had your on-prem systems, you had your firewalls, everything was great. The bad guys were on the outside, I have my moat, I'm on the inside, my stuff is protected. That doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. These days, it's more of a scenario where your users are scattered around the world. They have devices from tablets to cell phones to their laptops and workstations and everything in between these days. You also have scenarios where people want to work from any device at any time. It's no longer they walk into their office, they sit down at their desk and they do what they want to do for the day and they go home and that's it. So really, when you look at the tools available to you, you want to make sure that from an identity perspective, you're securing your identities, because really that's the primary point where the attackers are going after these days. You have phishing attacks, you have password spray attacks, you have directory harvesting, you have pass the hash, and all kinds of other ways that they go after your systems and services. Well, when you look at tools such as privileged identity management, that's a way of understanding who your users are, understanding how to remove the access to your systems, and ensuring that the identities you have out there are the ones you need to have available to you in your systems and services. Also, there's advanced threat analytics where you can watch as things progress on your systems in terms of your domain controllers on site, where you have identities and that are suddenly logging in from someplace you've never seen before. Well, you can actually gain real-time awareness of that and stop those kind of attacks to make sure that your users are who they say they are, not some random other person on the street or on the other side of the world. Also, same concept. You have Azure Advanced Threat Protection, where this is a cloud-based model where you can monitor your systems and your services and your identities both on-prem and in the cloud as well, which really creates a real new environment that allows you to have full visibility across all of your systems and services and your identities to understand what's happening in real time. Also, with regards to multi-factor authentication, things like that gives the ability to get rid of passwords in your environment. That's one of the bane of existence for all IT staff and service desks, where you've got 20 to 40% of your costs on a daily basis going to users who forgot their passwords or need a reset or they locked themselves out. What if you could eliminate that completely? What if they simply had an app on their phone, they log into their computers, they get a prompt on their phone, they say yes, approve, and they're logged in and that's it. Or from Windows Hello on the Windows 10 desktops, they could sit down at their desk, click the mouse to wake the screen up, the computer up. Computer comes up, it sees it's them, it's their face. Come on in. I haven't used a password in months. It's just much easier that way. I don't have to worry about it anymore. Moving on, information protection, protecting what you have. This is also part of the securing your stuff portion of the presentation. So when you want to focus on keeping your data secure, there's a lot of great things available to you these days from Microsoft 365 that really makes it so much easier than ever in the past. Here's where you have things such as risk-based conditional access to your data. What if you had the ability to say, if people are sitting at their desk, they're inside the office, inside my corporate boundaries, let them log in unprompted, no issues whatsoever with Microsoft Hello. Great. Let's say they're on travel. They're outside their corporate boundaries, but they're still on their usual device, and it's a recognized location, you understand what's going on, let them on in, no problem whatsoever. Let's say someone logs in with their identity from the other side of the world. That's probably not normal. Maybe it's from a risky IP. You might have that information just from Microsoft securing and protecting you from risky IP addresses, just from a world awareness perspective. You can have all these kind of things work in your favor and coming together to really create a holistic approach to security and protecting your information. Data loss prevention policies. Now with the unified labels in Microsoft 365, you have the ability from a conditional access, from cloud app security, from Microsoft information protection to set an identity around a label that says anything that has related to this particular project, this is sensitive. Don't let someone forward it outside my organization. Don't let someone share this on OneDrive or SharePoint or anywhere else. And you get to have the control over the boundaries of your information, how it's shared and how it's used. Even preventing someone from taking a screenshot of that on their phone, for example, from a critical information. Also e-discovery, or even advanced e-discovery, you have access to that as well. It really helps you wrap your arms around your data, help you find the information you need to find, and limit how much you have to share to outside investigators to just the specific things you need in like a FOIA request, for example. And also with regards to compliance management, having the ability for a compliance manager and compliance center and the Microsoft Trust Center, you can really go through the process of looking at the controls you have in place, what systems and standards you need to adhere to, such as ISO or NIST 853, and looking at this shared trust model and see that Microsoft has gone through the time already in looking at each of these various controls and securing your systems and your data across the board in a fully trusted and tested manner. And then you can just focus on your final piece from your application, your systems and access perspective. Moving on to threat management. This is the part 2 where you talk about visibility. This is really getting an understanding and raising awareness of current and future threats to your organization. So how do you find and stop the bad guys? That's what everyone wants to do. Your security operations team, your SOC, they don't care about Joe and Susie doing their daily day-to-day work stuff. They care about the attackers who are coming in with a password spray attack. Let's say you live in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Chances are you probably have a lot of people who are Redskins fans. You probably have a lot of people who their password is Redskins 2018 ! And they think, great, I'm secure. I've got a complex password. It's long. I've got caps. I've got lowercase. I've got numbers. I've got symbols. I'm secure. And the attackers are going to do a password spray attack that says Redskins 2018 ! Hey, look, I found one. It only takes one compromised identity to compromise your environment. Now, if you have the ability to say, take that specific phrase and put it into the banned passwords list, suddenly they can't use that anymore. And when they go to change the password, it's like, no, you can't use that, go use something else, and they go somewhere else. It really helps you in many ways to help secure your information, make sure you understand what the threats are, look for unusual behavior such as impossible travel. As we mentioned earlier, someone logs into the desktop, great. 2 hours later, they're logging in from the other side of the world, probably not a good thing. Phishing attacks, that's the number one thing we're seeing these days with regards to how people are going after identities and systems and services and your data. If they can compromise a single user, they're in. They may spend a few days looking across your environment, looking at directory, looking for more users, running that password spray attack against your directory again. And if you have 200,000 or 20,000 users, for example, they may have access to that 1% chance to 200 accounts now. It doesn't take that long to move laterally through your environment, find an escalated privileges account, and move on from there, and suddenly they own your network. Threat intelligence. There's now capabilities in Microsoft systems where they're actually going to be able to tell you what the threats are. Is it past the hash? Is it a golden ticket? Is it something else? And then tell you what the vulnerability is and how you can actually mitigate that through your own systems if it's not automated in response already. And there's a lot of great things in automation as well in terms of Let's say, for instance, you're using MCAS, Cloud of Protection or proxy, or you have things such as identity management or information protection, where it actually can say, where you're sending your logs from your firewalls up to the system, it aggregates that information, sees the risky alerts, see the problem with your data loss prevention policies, trigger, hey, something's out the door that shouldn't go out the door. It can actually talk back to their firewalls on site and say, hey, go block that IP address. There's something really strange happening there. We need to stop it immediately, and it does. So the fourth pillar, security management, this is really when we talk about real-time security visibility and control. This is also part two of visibility across the board. So how do you manage all of this securely? There's a wealth of tools, a wealth of information, but where do you start? How do you understand where the breach is occurring? How do you understand what threats are currently you're under right now at that present point in time? How does your SOC or your security operations team know and where to go, how to stop these things? So that's where tools across the board that really help you recognize known threats and emerging risks and threats, help you with situational awareness, helps you with rapid response to breaches, takes all of that information across multiple locations from your firewalls, from your application proxy servers, from your firewall, your various logs across Office 365 or your Windows 10 devices, and aggregate that all together so you have a unified place to look at all this information for a single pane of glass approach. Of course, this also helps with class platform visibility as well, because you're gathering all this information, and maybe you have existing tools in place already. What do you do about that? Microsoft isn't here to replace everything that you have. They want to augment what you have. Let's take all those Azure Active Directory, Azure AD logs, and send them into your SIM, send them into Unified Audit Log. Use the Intelligent Security Graph API to pull all that data to a central location so you can get full situation awareness across all of your systems. And now we'll send it back to Steve for our panel discussion.
Jeff, thanks for taking the time to demystify what is actually included in M365 from a security perspective. So let's introduce our panel. Starting George Scott, Cloud Strategist with Planet Technologies. Aaron, welcome back. Aaron Gilmet. Aaron is a technology professional focusing on productivity, business productivity. Denise Riley-Hughes, Cloud Success Manager with Microsoft. Denise, thank you for joining us. Dave Riley, one of our cloud strategists and client directors. Great to have you, Dave.
Great to be here.
And Bobby Chang, fantastic to have you as an Office 365 specialist focused in the federal area. So Bobby, I want to start with you. So when customers see they have this incredible security stack available to them through M365, oftentimes their instinct is to kind of shut everything down. But that's not really what we want them to do, because if they can't access the cloud productivity applications here, we're not really getting the ROI on our investment around M365. So what advice are you giving to customers around avoiding that problem?
Yeah, that's a really good dilemma that's very prevalent in the market, right, Steve, in terms of security folks coming in. They just want to essentially put security around their boundary and make sure that they know what's kind of going into the cloud in and out in terms of visibility across the board. And there's some awareness and training that goes into that process. But the one advice at least that I have, at least from a product standpoint where Microsoft sit, there's the whole concept of built-in security and not bolted on, right? And the whole concept is that we want to stay true to how we came up as a company from a productivity standpoint, right? If you think about back on how it all started with Windows, the Office client, it's very much all productivity first. It's about how do we enable folks to really work with each other effectively, to really bring out the best and be able to communicate with each other more efficiently. So with that in mind, though we have gone more across and include more capabilities across the security stack, we don't want to lose that in our vision, right? We don't want to lose that in the capabilities that we provide and the user experience that we provide. The mantra that we very much have still around our security capabilities, around our compliance capabilities, still very much productivity first. Things like inside of the compliance of having things in place, being able to really give compliance officer, security officer visibility to things that's happening around their enterprise data and around their enterprise environment. Also being able to allow information workers, the worker bees, really to just effectively work with each other and not really stepping on each other. So that's the product vision there.
Denise, you want to add on to that? Because a lot of your role, you're really focused on making sure the end users are seeing the value, the business users are seeing the value. So I don't know if you have anything you want to layer on top of that.
I do. Bobby, you brought up one word, enable. I think that is the new measure of the security team now in being able to effectively onboard the services that we're talking about, but really enable their user. And historically, it's always been when I turn a service on, how do I block access? How do I block, infiltration in any way? But now it's about, as you had said, how do I enable? How do I make it happen for the user first? Identity being the perimeter. For me, identity is almost the sun, and everything else has to revolve and orbit around that. And that's how you layer in the different components of the security while still allowing identity to give the user access to everything that they need in their day-to-day.
So turning the conversation, Aaron, a little bit more towards the technology side, how are we kind of enabling controls within the platform to stop, the data from just going everywhere?
Well, so some of those things that we have available to us, I think the big ones that people like to focus on, as soon as they get deployed, are around data loss prevention. So configuring a variety of security templates to be able to detect for sensitive information types. So whether it's going to be credit card numbers or driver's license numbers or social security numbers or bank routing information, things that especially as governmental organizations, things that you're really concerned with protecting that data of your citizenry. So in Office 365, we do have a lot of built-in templates that enable you to scour your environment, whether it's looking at on premises via the AIP file scanner to detect content that contains that sensitive information, or up in Office 365 using the DLP templates there to find content that's potentially being shared through SharePoint or OneDrive, content that's being sent through email, being able to detect that based on a set of rules and templates, and then cause actions to go back to security or compliance administrators, managers, wherever it needs to go to get approval to make sure that whatever the users are doing in their day-to-day actually lines up with what the business goals are.
We've talked a bunch about compliance already in this dialogue. Can we talk a little bit about Compliance Manager, Bobby? You mentioned it as well. Like, how are you seeing customers leverage that? And I think it also plays into the templates too, right? I mean, I don't think our customers really understand how many of these templates actually exist right now for so many of these requirements.
No, you're absolutely right, Steve. A lot of times the challenge that we get is it's almost, not to pat ourselves in the back, but it's embarrassment of riches, right? It's almost like there's too many options. And how do we make sure that, number one, customers don't really get overwhelmed? Number two is that we kind of meet them in the middle in terms of figuring out really what they need before, hey, here's like 40 things that you can actually start to deploy, right? I mean, as technologists, like, Aaron can kind of, and a lot of us here in the panel can relate, and like we just want to push buttons and show how cool our technology is, and that's kind of the tendency that I have to really, before remind myself to take a step back to really find out what it is that they need. Some of those needs that a lot of times before we even start to talk technology, Steve, and you know this, working with a lot of government clients yourself, is that how do we make sure that before we onboard that we're allowed to use the technology that you're proposing to us, right? That's kind of where compliance managers come in. I work in the federal space, so a lot of the clients that we work with have a FedRAMP compliance before going in, working through the authorization process to make sure they're comfortable with the security control that we provide, and augmenting that with things like compliance managers to say, hey, here's all the controls that we kind of promise, and make sure that you as a customer are comfortable enough to come into our environment, and the security control that we actually are guaranteeing to make sure that you're comfortable to come into the Office 365 and trust us as a provider to be able to put your data there on board. So there's a lot of things that we have. Compliance managers definitely a good first stepping stone to kind of get them sort of bought into our process and make sure that they're checking the boxes, and we're checking the boxes as well, and getting them onboarded.
So Dave, I love that embarrassment of riches comment. I mean, I think that is part of the problem our customers have when they adopt this technology is, again, there's so much, right? So where do we begin? Like, where are you seeing customers in your patch really starting to adopt it, because the notion that says, hey, I'm going to adopt M365 is a large pill to swallow, right? And I'm not even sure exactly what that means, right? But I'm going to adopt things that make sense to me. But what are some of the kind of low-hanging fruit, the easier things to adopt, or maybe even like the more popular things that are making a difference for your customers?
Sure. I mean, I think we've started to talk a little bit about it. Aaron brought up DLP and the concept of before you really even set up identities and you allow people access to services and data through those services, putting in a set of DLP policies that help to ensure that that castle wall that used to be the firewall and the infrastructure around an actual data center presence is still protected even outside the cloud. I think the other areas where it could be done but isn't done is they start to lock down too much, where you enable Skype and suddenly all you're doing is just a small piece of the capabilities of Skype because they don't want to do document sharing through Skype and they don't want to share documents in a shared session. So, from my perspective, the ability to add these layers of security in M365 is just as big an evolution as the actual migration from your on-premises environment to the cloud environment, meaning it's got to be done in this kind of a step-by-step manner. There are some agencies that we work with that know right away as they're deploying their Office 365 services that they want to layer in MFA. And they say, well, that's a requirement. We have that in our environment. It's a very easy to enable service within Office 365, and that becomes kind of the first layer, and it aligns to the whole identity protection perspective. So those are some of the initial areas that I've seen in our experience working here at Planet. Every customer is different, and most of the customers that we've seen have a tendency to lock things down more so than I think it makes sense to, and they just have to get comfortable. And Microsoft is making it a little bit challenging to get comfortable because there's so many services that are available, but I think it's all based on the customers that they're working with are driving these requirements. We just have to work with the customers to make sure to nail down their requirements.
Yeah, I honestly think, because I'm never afraid to be the guy who in the room who says something that's on everybody's mind. I'm never afraid to be that guy. I think that that's actually one of the largest issues that we face, is that customers are afraid to actually acknowledge the fact that they actually don't really know what they own. Mm-hmm. Like, they understand they own M365 and they understand they own like these 8 or 9 things within that platform, starting with email and moving on down the path. But they don't really understand what it is that they own. So, George, you're delivering a lot of cloud strategy sessions and security sessions. How are you helping customers through that?
Educating them as to what they own.
Yeah, right? Letting them ask the
honestly,
questions, right?
They don't know. The other thing is, historically, Microsoft has relied on partners to provide these security solutions. And so now it's educating them that Microsoft has stepped up its game and they can actually use the Microsoft solutions wholeheartedly, all the way around. Everything's there now, and it's only going to get better. So go ahead and start building around that, what they call the modern workplace, and start implementing things like Windows to Vendor ATP, which probably has a low adoption rate right now, but it should have a high adoption rate. But a lot of people they either don't know what it is or they don't trust it yet, because 3 years ago you wouldn't have even thought about deploying it. But Microsoft has stepped up its game. It knows that if it wants Windows to succeed, it's got to have security around it. The other thing I would say, going back to the Office 365 policies, it's amazing how many customers don't know what you can do. You almost got to go opt in instead of opt out, right? So know that you can do these things. There's, 2,000 policies you can implement them. I don't know how many thousands of policies, but you can do it. I had a customer that wouldn't use Skype
At all.
because they didn't know they could archive it. Yeah. And I sent them an article at the end of it and said, here's how you archive Skype, And for years you have not used Skype because you couldn't archive it or do discovery. Well, yes, you can. It's not that hard. So educating customers is what they can do with the suite, but also what they own and how to take advantage of it.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but that conversation of reminding customers what they own is not a one-time conversation. It's a continued conversation.
Absolutely.
And for any customer out there thinking that, well, I've had that, but I still don't know what I own, that's perfect, because we got to have that conversation regularly. And kind of to the point of this whole session and what you brought up, Microsoft absolutely is a security company.
Yep.
And so any customer that is hearing this for the first time, please know Microsoft is a security company, and we have to be if we are going to be one of the major cloud providers.
And not just on Windows.
Absolutely
Going
not.
across platform to Linux and the Mac and iOS
Absolutely.
and Android. It's not just a Windows company anymore.
Correct.
So that analysis then, I mean, understanding what you need from a compliance and security perspective and then mapping from that, right? So, and I feel the same way with the Azure session too, right? It's another data center, right? You own 3 data centers. We're going to extend that by this virtual data center in the cloud. Like you have your compliance regulation requirements aren't changing by adopting Microsoft M365 security products, right? We're just going to map them backwards. So I have a customer that I'm working with right now, and they actually have a great saying that I love in their adoption of this platform. They say, different but equivalent, right? Different but equivalent, and that's how they're analyzing all of this. And so Aaron, I bring this back to you. Our customers, they're not starting from scratch. They're governments. They've been here for a long, long time, right? They have security products today, sometimes 60, 70 different types of security products. Now they have this stack. How do you help them walk through that? Hey, it's different, but it's equivalent, maybe even better. How do you walk them through that?
So, similar to our earlier conversation today, it's really about understanding the business and, what it is, if it's from a product, if they want to approach it from a product-centric perspectives, they say, hey, I have, ABC antivirus, or I have, XYZ endpoint protection, or I have all these different, spam filters or intrusion protection devices, all these different point solutions doing things. I like to, I like to have a lot of interactive sessions with my customers where we talk about all the things that they're currently doing, and then map them to their business goals, and then say, that's great. But if products weren't a problem, if any of the solutions, if money, if all those things weren't a problem, what is it that you're really, 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 really trying to achieve? And get them to talk about what the requirements are. And as technologists, Bobby and Dave and all of us understand, the more we understand the products that we have to offer, the better we can map those those products and services to their business requirements. One of the other things that I focus a lot on with my customers when we're starting this journey is going to SecureScore. If you're not familiar with it, securescore.office.com. It has a lot of really great resources available, and they're organized in order of impact to the end user, impact to the business, difficulty, cost, all of these different ways to categorize and slice and dice these security controls to figure out how can I start taking advantage of these features, at a slow pace. How can I close the biggest gaps in my environment, and then how can I map those to existing business requirements that I already have.
So I want to throw out a couple scenarios, and feel free to kind of jump in, but I want to throw out a couple scenarios here. So, one of them I wanted to throw out is phishing, right? Phishing. Anybody feel free to jump in, but how are you seeing customers leveraging M365 in an anti-phishing scenario, or in operationalizing something around phishing?
Yeah, so with regards to phishing, obviously it's the biggest threat to most organizations today and one of the biggest concerns. So a lot of it is focused on Exchange Online protection, as well as Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection in terms of safe links and safe attachments. Those two things alone do a vast majority of what customers need to protect themselves against the risk, because oftentimes you'll see an email come in, it looks legitimate, it's coming from a known trusted source, maybe it's been spoofed. It has the right verbiage, it may have the right logos in place, but then there's a link there that says, hey, click here to go take care of this issue that we have right now. Your bank balance is too low. You need to take care of this. So when they come with a sense of urgency, that's when people click real fast. And I've seen some organizations where they go through security training as step number one to making sure the users are protected, because they are an organization's biggest asset as well as their biggest risk. So and even after the training, they still may say, oh, well, maybe a third of the people click on the link. Hopefully less, hopefully zero. But then if it has a malicious link, Microsoft has already gone through the process of analyzing the link, knowing if it's a safe link or not. And if it's okay, leave it on in. If it's a malicious link, it's been removed, and they'll know about it immediately. Or let's say it's an attachment coming in that has some kind of VB script associated with an Excel file, or maybe it's just like an image file that you click on the image and it's something that launches some code you don't even know even happens. And that's where the safe attachments come into play, where it actually will take even like a zip file where it may be packed like 10 layers deep. It'll actually expand each of those layers one by one until it gets to the core and actually tries to execute the code within that actual file to see if there's something wrong with it or not. If it's fine, let it on through. If it's not okay, pluck it out, quarantine it, or just delete it outright, depending on what you want to do. But a lot of those things coming together really help protect organizations, in addition to user education, from getting phished and losing access to their credentials immediately.
I'd like to even add on top of that, so inside of the M365 suite, we do have now some actual tools to allow you to run phishing campaigns against your users.
Yeah.
So even going one step further to provide our customers with some services to be able to start those campaigns against their users and see the click-through rates. It's really like running an advertising campaign against your users. Is you want to see the click-throughs, who got delivered to, who clicked it, who you need to go have a discussion with. So that's another, I think, really great tool in that suite to help.
So when we wrote,
The important thing about that is that from a security perspective, phishing is one of those issues where the end users have to get smarter, right? And what the technology that Microsoft provides protects the organization as the end users take their evolution and learn and become more understanding of the ways in which these threats manifest themselves. And so it's really great because that's not something where security has got a requirement or a prerequisite of the end users going through some sort of training. Safe links, safe attachments are there by design in order to support and protect the end user, which I think is great. I mean, the challenges of phishing are real, and these layered technologies that Microsoft's bringing to bear don't require end users to do anything other than learn, and then for the organization to learn about which end users are putting the organization more at risk. And I think it's great. I think it's great.
I would not disagree, but I would say the bad guys are getting smarter and that every single one of us can get phished. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's just a matter of them catching you in the right moment with the right email. I mean, they've learned how to spell. They're learning how to format. Okay, it's getting harder and harder. So I think the tools have got to keep getting better. So going back and giving my plug for Windows Defender ATP, you talked about Office 365 ATP, and I only say it because people aren't thinking about it. But in Windows, if I'm on a website and I click on a link and it runs something behind, it's just as bad as getting an email phish, right?
Yeah.
So you're protecting the OS as well as email.
And that to me comes into the whole different but equivalent scenario, right? There's so many people, I mean, nobody doesn't have a desktop AV at some point today. But let's start looking at an integrated story, and quite frankly, let's start looking at it even from a budget perspective, because maybe getting that integrated story inside a suite that you already own might be the right solution. Maybe it's not, but it might be the right solution. And if you're not looking at that, you're missing an opportunity.
So I'll throw this in. If you take a third-party antivirus company, all they're worried about doing is stopping the virus or the malware, whatever it is. Okay? They're not really thinking about the end user experience. They're not thinking about productivity. Microsoft cares about productivity. If we're not productive on Windows, we'll find another OS. I mean, the Mac gained a lot of market share because of viruses and stuff, right? Now it's swinging back the other way. So if Microsoft doesn't keep Windows productive, then they lose market share, right? So if you use the Microsoft tools, you know that in their mind, they're doing end user testing and keeping you productive while they're protecting you.
And I get your point. The reality is phishing is a threat that's out there.
It scares me.
No doubt.
Yeah.
What Microsoft brings to the table and what Planet as your strategic Microsoft partner can bring to the table is the ability to layer in these technologies that have already layered in the protections that don't require
And
users.
you own.
Right, exactly. So, and it takes you to that next layer. No doubt everybody's got to get smarter. No doubt everybody's at threat. But I think with the M365 tool set, you're in a much better shape.
Absolutely.
So Jeff, I want to throw my last question at you, and it's the most important one, because quite frankly, this has been an incredibly informative panel for our attendees, but we've only scratched the surface, right, of what is actually in this suite.
Absolutely.
So if you had to answer this question, which you do, because I'm throwing it at you, where should they start?
Secure Score. That's the easy place to start. Helps you with Office 365, helps with Windows 10, and now it's going to help you with Azure as well. So you have the big picture perspective of the easy to implement, low cost from an administration perspective, start here, easy, low-hanging fruit, move on to the mid-tier opportunities, and from there move on to long-term strategy type opportunities that you can do. Protect yourself against shadow IT, protect yourself against identity threats, protect yourself against access controls. A lot of great things there you can do there.
So, as you can see, there's a ton of value in M365 from a security perspective. These advanced security options are off the charts in terms of their functionality and what they can bring to your organization. And quite frankly, you might already own this, and if you don't, you should be thinking seriously about owning it. But I want to bring it back to planning. I want to bring it back to your business case. I want to bring it back to using this technology to enable your business, not pull your business back. And then finally, from a partner and a Microsoft perspective, I keep coming back to this. This is not a deploy it, buy it, let's put it up there and come back in 3 years and revisit it. I think I can speak for the Microsoft guys on the panel, and I'm positive I can speak for the Planet guys and say, we want to be there with our strategic customers every step of the way, walking through this with them all the time, answering these questions. Reach out to us, right? We're all in on this, right?
Absolutely.
That's what we're here for, right? Fantastic. Great job, everybody. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, everybody. Welcome to the panel discussion for our fourth session, Advanced Security Options with Microsoft M365. Joining me are Jeff Fowler, Dave Riley, George Scott, Aaron Gilmet, Denise Riley Hughes, and Bob Ballard as well is joining us as well. I want to remind everybody that there's the Q&A pod at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to go in and punch in your questions. We'll be happy to address them. We've got a great panel here. Certainly don't want to miss this opportunity. So I'll jump up with one of the first questions I have here. An organization, they have a compliance requirement that they need to adhere to. How can they meet those compliance requirements with M365?
All right, so this is Jeff. We covered some of this earlier with regards to some of the options, but really the first place anyone should start is with a compliance manager. Compliance manager is Microsoft's cloud services portal workflow assessment tool for doing risk assessments. This helps you with industry regulations, it helps you with compliance requirements, and it really has the ability to look across your cloud services across Office 365, Dynamics 365, and Azure. Look at your compliance requirements for your industry. Maybe you have HIPAA requirements or GDPR in the EU with your EU customers. Or perhaps on the federal side or government, you have NIST, 853 controls or 171. From the contractors, looking at DoD space or even ISO requirements. And what you can do is it allows you to take the hundreds and hundreds or thousands of hours of auditor time that Microsoft has gone through on their cloud services, use that as the foundational information to build upon the assessment, and then from there you can layer on top of that which controls that you need to address yourself to achieve compliance. This can be a mix of things. It can be a combination of processes that aren't even really technical in nature whatsoever. Do you have a system security plan in place, an incident response plan? And from a technology side, have you secured all of your user accounts across the board? Do you have MFA in place for your administrator accounts for your tenant, for example? And what it does is it helps you find out what your compliance score is, so you can help track your progress and prioritize the auditing controls that help reduce your organization's exposure to risk across the board. So there's really a lot of great things you can do using Compliance Manager to really help achieve a high level of compliance across your cloud security, your cloud solutions.
Thanks, Jeff. So moving to the next question, and this is a really interesting one. I'm going to paraphrase here because it's quite long, but the question relates to a security review mapping to the M365 features and functionality from a security perspective. So, customer today has many security products and security settings and various different security that they have to run. They've got this M365. How do we suggest as a panel they go through reviewing their security requirements, mapping that to the M365 security components?
So I'll kick this one off. As we mentioned earlier, SecureScore really is the best place to start from a security options across the board perspective for your Microsoft services. Includes Office 365, it includes your Windows 10 devices, it includes your Azure environment. And that's just a great, one-stop shop place to begin the journey in discussion of security for your environment from technology and processes perspective. But really, organizations have business requirements and needs. So they need to start from a business perspective in terms of what are the essential things that are critical to my organization and my ability to keep focusing on the mission of what we do and delivering the services that we offer to our customers across the board. And really, if you start there from a requirements perspective, then you can start looking in terms of what kind of Microsoft tools, technologies, or internal processes can meet those requirements. So you really need to take a holistic approach in terms of how you go about figuring out what your requirements are. Seeing what tools, capabilities, services you already have available to you based on your licensing. You have E3, you have a lot of great things such as Advanced Threat Analytics for your on-prem Active Directory. And if you have E5, you can graduate to some of the other great tools and capabilities such as AD Premium P2, some of the automation around conditional access, automation around your data loss prevention policies, and things like that. So there's really just a myriad of options. It really comes down to what your specific requirements are and then how you can best meet those based on processes, peoples, and tools.
I would just like to go ahead and add on to that. If you're not familiar with SecureScore, I will go ahead and beat that drum as well, so that Jeff isn't the only one that mentions it in this session. But one of the things that it does do is it allows you to sort the activities and the priorities based on different types of things. So if you have, even at a high level, you say, I need to worry about, I need to focus on things that are related to identity, for example. You can filter on different topic areas and figure out some of the controls and tools that we have available inside of Office 365 to help you with some of those things. You can export that list to a CSV or to a PDF. I like it in a CSV. You can color code and sort and tag and filter things and add notes in Excel. So as you work through those items, you can begin crossing them off and then and see what you have left. It's a pretty good way to start attacking that, and then of course bringing in a partner or your Microsoft account team to help engage in some of those conversations as well.
Yeah, so I'll just layer on top of this, right? So by the way, Jeff knows I'm a big proponent of SecureScore as well, but I don't want to be the third person to jump in and say, oh, SecureScore is the answer. But I'll also say, to quote my longtime friend Dean Iacovelli, who helps lead the security team in state and local government at Microsoft, security is technology, people, and process, right? And I don't think he invented that, but he's been saying it for 20 years, so I've got to beat it to me from him. And so the second piece of this, I think there's a couple of steps you need to do when you're thinking about this. And I brought this up a couple of times. I'm just going to elaborate on a little more here, which is you need to decide sort of what some of your guiding principles are going to be around security. And the examples that I used before are relevant here too. So, am I going to have my security be, data classification based, right? So I'm going to have, so I'm going to really focus on classifying data and creating different rules that apply to that, right? Or am I really going to focus on, secure understanding who's coming in and layer on conditional access policies, et cetera. And yes, sometimes there's a mixture of all of those things for sure. But sort of understand, what are sort of the native tenets. I want people to be able to access from most any device as long as it meets minimum standards. Okay, that's great. Then maybe we shift the focus on some of the other controls that we can do around identity, shift the focus around doing data classification, right? If I'm not comfortable with that, right, we can focus on, securing the devices and limiting what can be downloaded to them and some of those things. So sort of set that sort of some of those guiding principles in place, and then take something like SecureScore, right? So one of my favorite features of SecureScore is I can export the information from SecureScore into an Excel spreadsheet, and then we can put some process around it. And what I mean by that is, so just because SecureScore gives you recommendations, right? And I think Jeff and Aaron can both agree on this. we can't always do all of them. Maybe they're too great an impact to my business process. Maybe they're too great an impact to the end users and what my culture is, all of those things. So we need to make decisions. We decided yes or no to these secure score suggestions. Who made the decision? And capture that information so that we can revisit it regularly when we go back to say, when somebody says, why haven't we enabled MFA for everyone? Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's too hard a lift for most people, but it might be for you for lots of reasons. So why haven't we done that? Well, we decided in a meeting, Steve Jones or Sarah Smith decided that it was too big a lift for our users. That decision was made on September 28th, 2018. So we can revisit to understand why we're not doing these things, especially as, people come in and out of the organization. So you can understand, layering that additional sort of historical record of why decisions were made, et cetera, bundling that all up together, you have this great sort of holistic view of what was recommended, why you made the choices, what the guiding principles were so that you funnel back to those, right? And then who made the decisions and when.
And Bob, I like the fact that you kind of broaden the conversation to people, process, and technology, because what we've been talking about, I think up until that point, was very focused on Microsoft Cloud Technologies and M365, and that's obviously the topic of the session. But we typically work with customers who already have enterprise security policies in place prior to making the move to the cloud. And what they're offered with the capabilities within M365 is the opportunity to assess what they have in place today and compare and contrast to what they need to enable and secure the cloud properties that they're migrating to. And so there's no doubt that there's a lot of options for them. It's important for them to use the guidance of a trusted partner, to use the guidance from Microsoft for those Microsoft-specific areas, but also to address the security policies across their enterprise. And so when you focus, as you said, on people, process, and technology, and make sure that you're understanding why you're deciding to make a change in your security policies and why you're deciding to leverage new technologies, that you have those well documented and people understand that, and then there's a whole user adoption step to that as well.
Yeah, and so Dave, thank you for doing that, because I think you actually answered the question that I think was being posed by our attendee, which is, I think that's exactly the question, which was, I'm trying to, I've now acquired this suite of Microsoft security products. How do I best review what it is and map it to my current security, portfolio, and make decisions about what to implement and what not to? And I think that was the intention of the attendee's question. So I think you nailed it. So if you want to, put that in a little piece, little snippet, what would it be for that attendee?
Yeah, my sense is that you have to take the same approach with your engagement towards assessing the security capabilities of Microsoft M365 and the same approach that you've taken with actually migrating and enabling the services, which is assess what your current environment has today, assess what your requirements are, which is what Bob was getting to with people, process, and technology. That's changed. So, put an engagement around implementing an MFA as part of a larger strategy. Make sure your enterprise security team is engaged. Make sure you've got a trusted partner, and work through the steps to ensure that you're meeting the requirements, not just layering in technologies that end up complicating your world.
Yeah, and so let me throw that to Denise, because a lot of that we've been talking about here, Denise, has been from sort of the CISO security side of the house. But in your role, you do a lot of business, working with the business. How are you, and there was an earlier question, one of the earlier sessions about enterprise architecture and how that all maps together. How are you in your role, Denise, pulling all of these pieces together with, of course, the end result being hopefully they understand what they own?
Right. So a lot of what we're doing is, at least in the customer success manager place, we are working actively with our customers on what we call success plans. And so with those enterprise architects out there, those success plans are almost a precursor to what Planet's doing with the full-on assessments. And it helps the customer both assess their goals initially and bring them long-term, follow through with them long-term. One of the pieces about security that I'm seeing more so in the user space is, especially as customers are becoming more mature in their adoption of Office 365, it's no longer about, okay, we've turned on all of the core workloads. Now we're now we're getting very specific about things. In the security space, what I've seen is some customers parse off their projects to be agency or department specific. I know that when it comes to regulatory compliances, that sometimes needs to be handled a little bit differently. How is my tax department doing this and still maintaining IRS 1075 compliance? How is my child and family services and public safety and corrections doing this and maintaining CJIS compliance if we're keeping our data within Office 365 or within Azure and in the cloud? And looking at those instances specifically does allow the business now to be brought back into the conversation, but that's where, as you look down that maturity scale, and we talked about this in the panel discussion, that's what we're going to start seeing our customers do. So it's not an all up, this is my Office 365 global admins, this is, you know, going to be turned on for everybody, but now becomes very specific to the user, to the agency, and to the use case.
Yeah, I want to encourage everybody again that there's a Q&A pod down at the bottom of the screen, and if you have any questions on this pretty hot topic, you know, feel free to dump it in there. So, and I think Denise, tagging on to that, from my perspective, you know, our government customers, they're not like commercial customers, small and medium-sized commercial customers that are delivering one product or doing one thing. Our customers, many of them are doing everything, right? They've got all sorts of, you know, secure data that needs to be secure, privacy data, and one department's, you know, privacy might not be another department's privacy, right? There's all this stuff that's going on. So what kind of advice would we give businesses? What kind of advice would we give CISOs in terms of navigating this in the frame of, you know, M365?
That was directed towards me.
It was, of course, yeah.
All right. What advice would we give the CISO?
CISO and the business, right? So I think getting back and kind of further doubling down on the question, you know, our businesses, like you said, there's a tax department, there's an HR department, we own citizen data, we might own business data, we have all sorts of different data types, different, you know, security requirements associated with those data types, different compliance requirements, all within one customer, all within one organization. So it's not an easy thing for them to map, and then of course have to understand how M365 supports that. So what are some of the things you're doing, getting to like the CISO side of this, to help them understand how to, you know, walk through that walk?
So one of the first questions I'll always ask a customer was, when was the last security briefing that you had? Not only going through security briefings, but going back through, this is what you already own. You know, it's interesting when you talk about security in the business, because it means so many different things to so many customers. Exactly. And getting to the root of what it is for that particular state or agency or city or county or federal agency, whatever that may be, it really is the why. Why are you doing this? And we can bring all the advice possible. We can bring all the resources and background, the knowledge that this team, you know, I'm looking at the faces on this video here, that you guys bring to the table is huge. And we can share all day long with our customers, but what's the root of what you're trying to do? And, you know, I'll go back to the statement that I made in the panel. It's no longer blocking users. Okay, we're going to turn this on, but we're not going to let them do this. My best advice to a CISO is, great, you're going to turn it on. Now let's talk about how we make sure the users can use it. Let's talk about adding those layers in and making it relevant for the user, so that the impact isn't, well, I tried to turn it on and I tried to access it, but now I can't anymore. It's about, this has been great, you know, I have to learn a little bit more, but from a user impact, I've actually found it not to be a great lift for the business.
And Denise, isn't that what we've started to see as the challenge, right? Is that the enterprise IT organization, the CISO's office, the enterprise security team, is attempting to maintain their presence as, we're going to block it unless we know better about it. And they're being challenged by the business to say, no, you're not, because we now have people in the field who need access to this data. So the business does drive it. You've been, you know, pretty strong advocate that the business has to kind of drive things, and then enterprise IT has to kind of keep pace and transform themselves. I think that what we're seeing is that conflict, and it's somewhat of an engineered conflict created to some extent by Microsoft and the availability of these security tools, allows for the businesses to know that, hey, this is now possible. I can basically supply my 3,500 consultants in the social services department with iPads or Surface tablets, and they can go out and they can investigate issues in the family home and within the social service purview that they're responsible for. Hey, enterprise IT, now you need to secure it. And how do you do that? The enterprise IT can't just say, no, you can't do that anymore, right? So the challenge is the expectations driven not only by that, but also, and all the features and capabilities of Microsoft, but also the consumer orientation to cloud technologies, the mobile device expectations that people have, that there should be an app on my phone that I can do stuff, and they're not as concerned about securing it. That's the enterprise IT shop's responsibility. So that expectation is engineering this conflict, and I think Microsoft's doing a great job of creating layers of additional capabilities that allows enterprise IT to transform and say, okay, yeah, you can do that, and here's how we're going to secure these new borders, this new frontier, which is great.
Yeah, I just have one quick comment on that, because this is often, this often comes up in my talks with customers, which is, for the first time, sort of the capability set that's in M365 is sort of an enablement for peace talks between security and the business groups, right? Because for the first time, instead of security saying no, because I have flexibility to secure specific information, because I can do these capabilities that we've been talking about for the last hour and more or less all day, because I have these capabilities, I can, for the first time, say yes to these things. I can avoid the big red lever, right? You're not allowed to access on the outside of my moat, right? I can say, I feel confident that you can access this with these devices, with this, outside the organization in a mobile way, through the web, all of these kinds of things, because I know I have these security controls in place, and I can document them and measure them.
Okay, we had another question pop up, and this probably will be our last one. Have you seen clients using or mapping the Fed risk management framework to M365 Azure tooling, or using the SANS 20 critical security controls for prioritization of Cyber D? I don't know, Aaron or Bob or anybody. Jeff, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, so when you look at security controls, you look at software development, you look at the critical aspects of securing your environment across Azure, across Office 365, the Service Trust Center is the first place to start, because Microsoft has actually gone through the process of documenting every single one of the 853 controls. They've also discussed 864 controls for combining security with the software development lifecycle from a government perspective for Rev 2. So taking all those things together and looking at the auditing information Microsoft has in place, looking at what they've done to secure the underlying infrastructure itself, and then looking at what you need to do from a Delta perspective, using Compliance Manager to look at the differences, or looking at your own organization's compliance management framework, and understanding from a risk management framework or whatever else you want to use, but really going through the process of identifying, looking at the different control families, looking at the requirements that they have in each one of them, making sure that it applies and how that maps to your new services in Office 365 or Azure or Windows 10, and making sure that everything lines up accordingly is really the critical thing to do across the board there.
Great. And yeah, thank you for the attendee who posted that question. Jeff will find a way to get you those links. So thank you very much to our panelists, to our attendees. This is going to wrap up day one of our GovCloud third annual Cloud Summit. Don't forget, tomorrow, day two, starts at 8 o'clock a.m. PST, 11 o'clock EST. Incredible session tomorrow. The first one's going to be on easy collaboration using SharePoint, Teams, and Planner. There is a ton of interest out there in Teams now that it's been released into the government tenant. That starts at 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. We have 2 sessions after that for a total of 3 sessions. please feel free. We're still taking registrations. So if you have somebody else in your organization you think would like to attend or would benefit from the session tomorrow, we're still accepting registrations. So feel free to send them the link or reach out. I really appreciate everybody's time. And Lyman, I'll throw it back to you.